Welcome back. In the previous step, we wrote a unit test using a stub and we saw what are the problems with a stub. In this specific step, let's try and change that unit test to use a mock, right? So let's try and get the basics around mocks and try to write a unit test with it. Now I'll copy this test, paste it in, and I'll call this some business mock test. Cool, right? So we are going to use a mock. You'd see that there are a few compilation errors. That's okay. All that you need to do is to delete them and all the compilation errors should go away. I'll do organize imports to make sure that we have perfect tests, right? So if you run this test, this would run. But the thing is, these are using stubs, right? Even though the stubs are not really defined in here, we are still making use of a stub and not a mock. And how do we create a mock and how do we update our test to use the mock? Let's get started now. So one of the most important things is Mockito is one of the most popular mocking frameworks. More than 80% of the projects today which are doing some kind of mocking in Java are using Mockito. It's specifically because the syntax of Mockito is very simple to use. Let's see the power of Mockito in this specific step. The way you can create a simple mock. So mock is creating an example of a specific interface. So I would want to create a sample implementation of the some data service. I'm saying some data service mock of some data service dot class, and I can say add static import for mockito.mock. If you're using any of the latest versions of Eclipse, this should automatically come up. Otherwise, you can use import static org.mockito.mockito.mock. So once you add this, you should be able to do mock of this. And I can say control 1 and I can assign statement to a new local variable. So some data service and I'll call this mock. Data service mock. Cool. We have created a mock. What we would want the mock to do, we would want it to return this data back, right? So when on the mock, when on the data service mock, somebody calls the retrieve all data method. So when somebody calls the retrieve all data method, what we want to do is we would want to return this data back, right? When we are using a stub, the way we would do that is by directly hard coding the data. So we create the entire method syntax and we say return this back. But when we are using the mock, the way we would do that is define that programmatically. How do we do that? The way we can do that is by saying when is another static method in Mockito class. So you can see that there is another static import which is coming in org Mockito when data service dot retrieve all data is called. So when data service retrieve all data is called, what should you do? What should the mock do? Then return, what should it return? This is the data it needs to return back. This data service would return that data back. Now instead of setting some data service stub, what I'm doing is setting some the data service mock. Let's see what would happen now. Let's run the test. Cool, the test succeeds. So let's take a pause and look at what is the thing that we did until now. So instead of creating a stub like in the earlier test, what we did is we created a mock. And how did we create a mock? We just called a mock method which is present inside the Mockito class. So it's a mock is a static method inside the Mockito class. So we call the Mockito mock class some data service and this returned back to us a mock. And what we did was on the mock, we used a when method to say when this method is called, return this data back. So instead of creating the entire definition of this stub like we did it in here, so in here we are creating the entire definition. So implements this and so on and so forth. Instead of doing all that, we just say one line of code. So when this method is called, then return this specific data. That's the capability of a mock. It can do what you ask it to do. And then we are setting the mock into the business service. And then we are calling the methods, and we see that the results are as expected. Let's comment the other two tests to keep things very safe. So I'm commenting out the test calculate sum using data service empty and calculate sum using data service one value. Now that we completed the calculate sum using data service basic, we are now using a mock to test this. As an exercise, you can implement the other two as well. So what happens when it returns empty data and one value? So you can update the other two tests to use the mock instead of the stub. I'll see you in the next step. Until then, bye bye.